we're going to go through various categories: best innings, worst shot, best bowling spell, that sort of thing. So let's get cracking with the best innings of the year. And this is any form of the game, any format, any team. Daniel, let's go with you first.
Well, I can't look beyond one extraordinary effort that was... I mean, it'll open up a whole new avenue to conversation, I guess, because it was played by a man whose year was, broadly speaking, filled with doubt, uncertainty, everybody gazing at him saying, is he the right man for the job?
Keir Starmer.
Not quite. Not quite. England's cricket version thereof. Ollie Pope, who made an absolutely astounding 196 in what was possibly, well, it was definitely statistically England's greatest comeback victory in India. I don't think anybody has come close to retrieving a situation like they were in, a first innings deficit of nearly 200. It was the first match of the series. Could Bazball survive the intense pressure of an Indian winter? And for, I'd say a brief moment, for about a day and a half, it looked like they actually could when Ollie Pope compiled, it wasn't really a smashing knock, but he compiled 196 in 278 balls. England had begun with a deficit of 190 in their second innings. They then put on 420 to set India an awkward target. Then we know what happened. We'll come to it again later, I'm sure, in the show. It was an amazing knock, and it was one of those ones which Ollie Pope produces every now and then. And I dare say Andy will be able to back me up in saying that Ollie Pope has had one of the most in-out years of any cricketing human in the entire history of Test cricket. He either seems to score a remarkable 190 or 150 at the Oval, or absolutely nothing. How do the numbers stack up on that, Zolt?
Well, the numbers are that he scored 994 runs in the year. That was in 30 innings, averaged 33.1. 3 centuries. 432 times in the history of Test cricket, in men's Test cricket, a player has scored 3 or more Test hundreds in a calendar year. And that average by Pope of 33.1 is the lowest average by any player with 3 Test hundreds in a year. Later in that series, he had a 3-ball pair in Ranchi. Also played a couple of really influential innings in New Zealand in the first and second test. What made that 196 so extraordinary in the context of Pope's own career was that it was in the second innings, and it's the only time he scored a century in the second innings. If you take that innings out of his career record he's played 55 tests, batted 42 times in the second innings. In the other 41 of those, he's averaging well under 20 with only 2 50-plus scores. So it was a real bolt from the statistical blue for Pope. By comparison, his first innings average is 44. So, yeah, he's had a really odd year of success and failure. And a lot of talk about his position at number 3, now averaging 40 at number 3, which is really good in terms of recent England number 3s, but he's had this wildly inconsistent year and a couple of really strikingly good innings in New Zealand, batting down at 6.
Zoltz, what about for you? Best innings of the year?
Well, for England, Pope's is quite hard to look past. Hayden Duckett played a great innings in that series as well. In the third test. We had those 2 huge innings in Pakistan when England made 800, Brooke made a triple 100 route, his highest test score 262 in a record England partnership. But my sort of innings of the year by any player is also high up there, 20% full shot percentage. That was Aidan Markram right at the start of the year for South Africa against India. A truly extraordinary innings in a really extraordinary match. South Africa were bowled out for 55 in the first innings. India replied with 153. And then Markram got 106 off 103 balls, 2 sixes, 17 fours, out of a total of 176 all out. He was out with the score, I think, 162 for 8. And it's a record that cricket stats badgers love, the Bannerman record. Bannerman in that first test match, he faced the first ball in Test history, made 165, retired hurt out of a 245 all-out total, 67% of Australia's runs. Markram was challenging that. If he'd managed to keep it going for another half hour, we might have seen the end of one of the oldest sporting records in history. But and that was up against Jasprit Bumrah, who we'll talk about later, and he managed to get 34 off 46 off Bumrah, whilst Bumrah was taking 6 for 27 against the rest of the South African batting lineup. So that for me is my world test innings of the year.
Just a quick note on Harry Brook, of course, that 123 propelled him to number 1 in the world, knocking off his teammate Joe Root. And in an act of, I suppose, deference, he then proceeded to get absolutely nothing in the next game and dropped to number 2. I guess that's just the natural order of things had to be restored.
Can I chuck in Aaron Jones, a name we wouldn't necessarily have anticipated at the start of the year, with his remarkable 94 not out of 40 balls to beat Canada for the USA in the T20 World Cup. 10 sixes, got the party started in the USA. Daniel, you were there and across it all.
It was amazing. It was absolutely stunning, partly because we were joined by Peter de la Penna on commentary, who had said, Aaron Jones, why do they keep picking this guy? He's no good. He just can't do it at the top level, Dan. He kept screaming at me. As was it 8 balls were lost? Good, Dallas isn't a very big ground, and he kept thumping it over deep mid-wicket, and there'd been a massive deluge, and it was basically a swamp, a muddy swamp around the outside of the ground, and the ball kept on going over the stands and into the swamp, and balls had to keep on being brought back. It's one of the longest short innings I've ever seen, but that was no fault. Well, I suppose it was the fault of Aaron Jones. He kept on losing the ball.
Sensational. Right, some very good suggestions there. Well done, everybody. I'm not sure how we're going to determine who wins these, but I think that they all get an award because we're very generous like that here on the Test Match Special podcast. So let's move swiftly on to the favourite wicket of the year. Any wicket, whatever you like, can be anywhere, can be anything. Zoltz, first of all, what's been your favourite?
My favourite wicket of the year, Henry, I'm going to go for one of the final wickets Jimmy Anderson took in Test. He bowled out Rohit Sharma in the second Test in Visakhapatnam, a game in which he bowled tremendously, 3 for 47 in the first innings, followed up with 2 for 29 in the second. It was a game in which we saw 2 of the all-time greats of bowling, Anderson and at the end of his career, Bumrah, at the absolute peak of his. He took 6 for 45 in the first innings, really displaying the art of fast bowling at a supreme level. But just because we knew Anderson was coming towards the end, he had a couple of similar wickets on England's previous tour of India in 2020-21. Beautifully clean bowled past the outside edge of Rohit Sharma's bat. That for me was my personal favourite wicket of the year, for an element of nostalgia and I guess gratitude at the 20 plus years of craft, skill and magic that we've enjoyed from Jimmy Anderson.
I've got 2. I can't separate them, I'm afraid. I'm going to go with the first one because we haven't mentioned Jaiswal in the dispatches when talking about best innings. And of course, he, as the second leading run scorer this year in Test cricket, has produced some incredible innings. Scored so many sixes, it's unreal. We've been talking about Ben Stokes' sixes and this, that and the other. He's going at over 2 sixes per match when he's opening the batting. He's been the sensation of 2024. Just such a beautiful player to watch. And so, being a cruel and mean-hearted man, there was nothing I enjoyed more than after he had accused Mitchell Starc in the very first Test match of the Border Gavaskar Trophy of not bowling quickly enough. And I think he did wallop him around the place at Perth. And he was in complete control. Come the second Test with Australia 1-0 down, the very first ball of the match. Of course it's got to be Mitchell Starc. Of course he's bowling to Yashasvi Jaiswal. And he absolutely pins him with the perfect full 90-mile-per-hour Yorker. Bang on the ankle. I think he might even have considered a DRS there. He was plumb LBW. And that was a cricketing god. So I'm afraid you don't mess with Mother Cricket. But if you had to make me choose, it would be another wicket that took place down in Australia this year. It was at Brisbane. It seems like a long time ago because it sort of is, really. It's nearly a year ago. It's in January of 2024. And it was such a shocking win. West Indies beating Australia in Brisbane at the Gabatoir. And a man that we'd heard about vaguely in dispatches, but never really seen, Shamar Joseph. He came to the party with a broken foot. He came charging in. He took 7 for 68 in that innings. to basically blow Australia apart. But the game was an absolute ripper, won in the end by the West Indies by 8 runs because of Shamar Joseph and the last wicket to get rid of Josh Hazlewood, castling him. I mean, you might argue that there were more significant wickets before that, Steve Smith and whatnot, but the wicket to finish the game that sent everybody into conniptions. There were people crying. Brian Lara was crying in the commentary box because it was the first time that the West Indies had beaten Australia in Australia since Andy Katoe, 94, 95, something like that.
The last time they won in Australia was in February 1997 at the WACA. The last time they beat Australia anywhere in a test match was May 2003. So, just over 20 years.
And this lad from absolutely nowhere bowling bullets, but crucially with that broken foot, so that every wicket he got, he then just went down on his haunches in trying to suppress the agony. And he was going at about 7 and over as well. It was a scintillating spell, an incredible moment, and probably my moment, actually, of the year.
Amazing, spectacular, and I'm going to chuck in one from a test match as well, a more recent test match, and that was the women's test at Bloemfontein between South Africa and England. England bowled brilliantly that second innings, sensational to remove South Africa's top order, middle order, everything you like, and it was drama everywhere you looked. We saw stumps flying everywhere. South Africa all out for 64. Brilliant bowling from Lauren Bell. But to finish the game, the final moment of it, Nonkululeko Mlaba, who'd bowled absolutely brilliantly throughout the test match, was running to make her ground, saw the ball coming hurling in towards her, and did what Alistair Cook did all those years ago, which was try and get out of the way of the ball without having a bat in the ground. And so, stumps shattered, she's not got her bat down, she's not in her ground, run out. Farcical way of ending the test match. A test match of immense quality in many, many ways, finishing in glorious, farcical nonsense, and I loved it.
And what made it even madder was that the ball was nowhere near her because the throw was coming in from the other side. So she was in no danger of being hit. It was terrific, wasn't it? And that was one of South Africa's lowest scores, if not lowest score in Test history, wasn't it? 64 all out?
Yeah, I think it was around maybe in the third or fourth lowest score. Either way, it was an inglorious conclusion to an excellent game of cricket. And speaking of bad moments and incompetence, what about this? Might be my favourite award because it celebrates the daft and the silly, and I want to go worst shot of 2024. What has been the most appalling shot that we have seen in the last 12 months?
Well, we've seen quite a lot, Henry. And when you mentioned the South Africa being skittled in the women's test match, one of my stats of the year, in men's test cricket, we've had 3 team innings in which the side has been bowled out for under 60. You had South Africa all out 55 in that game I mentioned earlier on at the start of the year. India 46 all out in the first innings of the series against New Zealand, en route to a 3-0 home defeat. And Sri Lanka 42 all out recently against South Africa. That ties the year record for most dismissals for under 60 in Test history with 1888 and 1896. So, and to put this in context, 3 this year. There were only 2 teams bowled out for under 60 between June 1958 and March 1994, when England was skittled for 46 in the West Indies. In 800 tests, that only happened twice in that period, and we've had 3 this year. A lot of bad shots in those innings. In terms of England, again, quite a lot of bad ones that we've seen in the Bazball era. Dan, I think you might be. Are you going to go for Root's reverse scoop off Bumrah?
Well, that was one of 2, because the great thing about that, it was quite objectively the worst shot ever seen. But sports teams do like to sort of make black white. So we were informed at great length that it was actually a genius shot. It was a brilliant idea to attempt to hit the last ball of what would have been the last ball of Bumrah's spell over the slips for 4, the best bowler in the world. Why not try the hardest shot against the best bowler in the world at a crucial moment in a test match? Because if he had done that, apparently it would have opened the floodgates to victory. It obviously didn't do that. It opened the floodgates to India's victory. And it collapsed thereafter. So, yes, I mean, it was objectively abysmal, and I really did love the justification for it afterwards and the hand-wringing. But actually, I want to choose a shot that a lot of people will it would have gone under their radar. And it was by Lytton Das, who played one of the great innings of the year, in actual fact. Played an absolutely brilliant knock for Bangladesh against Pakistan in a series that we will come to shortly. But on this occasion, playing against Sri Lanka, he had been out in the field for so long. He'd been keeping wicket, I think, and he'd been thoroughly exhausted and cheesed off as Sri Lanka had piled on the runs. And he let his cheesed offedness show by, at the end of the day, coming out to bat. Off his very first ball, he decided, I've had enough of this cricket lark, and just charged down the wicket pointlessly to Fernando and shanked the ball gently into the hands of mid-on. And he stormed off as quickly as he'd stormed on. He stormed on in fury. He stormed off in fury. He'd done his job as far as he was concerned of demonstrating that cricket is a silly sport, and that was it. He went and sat down in a very darkened room with a towel over his head, I imagine.
In which case, I'll pick Roots off Bumrah. A lot of competition from England. When Dan Lawrence at the Oval, having been asked to open, to do a job that he'd basically never done before, came out thrashing in the final test at the Oval, and probably 10 or 12.
That was an innings of the worst shot. So that was a compilation tape of the worst shots.
10 or 12 on the nominations list from that innings. Harry Brook against Will O'Rourke in the final test in New Zealand, I can't remember if it was the first or second ball, had a horrible hack, the kind that had worked in that century we talked about, but it was an ugly shot. But I'm going to go for Root because, as you mentioned, the context of the game, also the trajectory of Bumrah, aside from his brilliance as a bowler, you'd think the scoop from the way Bumrah bowls, low trajectory skidding on, makes it even more difficult. But the great thing about it for me was that it did spark one of possibly the best run of Root's career. After that, he went back to sort of his pre-Bazball style. In his next 9 tests, averaged 90 with 5 centuries, 4 other 50-plus scores, and a strike rate of 60. Previously, under Bazball, he'd been up in the mid-70s strike rate. And this was much closer to his prevailing career strike rate prior to Bazball. He put that shot away and batted absolutely magnificently for England for the rest of the year.
This needs to be called the Shannon Gabriel Award, really, doesn't it?
Why did he do that?
Yeah, against all bad shots, that one must be judged. I'm going to chuck him something very similar, actually, and that is Ollie Pope at Hamilton. Reverse scoop. He's trying to emphasise his value to the side. He's had success batting a little lower down the order. England were going to lose the game, of course. He was on 17, England chasing 6, 5, 8, and he plays a shot that he's occasionally played, but nothing like near the success level of Joe Root against Matt Henry, who's had a brilliant tour. And you're thinking, well, this is, if you're trying to show grit and determination and you're trying to show your own value to the side, what on earth are you doing? So that for me, it's recency bias possibly, because as you say, Zoltz, there are plenty to choose from. But that's part of the fun of this England Test side, isn't it? Because
well, there was Duckett in that very innings actually, but you might argue played an even worse shot in the very same innings, charging down the wicket off about his 4th ball, having hit 1 for 4 and dragging it back on with about 10 minutes to go till stumps.
Yeah. And it has been quite an unusual year for England. They played a lot of tests in this calendar year, which is really the result of where the international one-day tournaments are falling. The World Cup at the end of 2023 meant that the last winter's test were played this year, and this winter's test being played before New Year because of the Champions Trophy coming up after New Year. England have won 9, lost 8 of their test matches this year. Only once have they won more tests in a calendar year. That was in 2004. When they won 11 out of 13, and only once have they lost more tests in a calendar year, when they lost 9 out of 15 in 2021. So it's been a really mixed year of some amazing wins, some amazing defeats, and a lot of that sort of the brilliance and awfulness that we get from the high risk approach that the Stokes-McCullum era has unleashed.
And with that, we've talked about batting. What about bowling spells? What has been your favourite bowling spell of the year, Daniel?
Well, I would say that my favourite bowling spell of the year has been 2024 by Jasprit Bumrah.
Yes.
And look, I mean, there are many other spells. I've mentioned Shamar Joseph. I want to make a brief mention of Tom Hartley's 7 for 62 in his very first Test match, because that came off the back, actually, of one of the worst spells you could wish to see. His own first spell in Test cricket, when he went for 7, 8, 9 and over, and Stokes kept him on. And then it came good in that incredible victory to win by 20-odd runs. But in all seriousness, Bumrah this year has been absurd across every single format. I was just flicking through scorecards and Bumrah, of course, he took 6 in that one, and he took 3 for 40 in that. And then you look at his T20 World Cup record. That was astounding. I know that some of those pitches weren't the easiest, and he was bowling a fair bit in America, where there was that drop-in pitch in New York. But he was going at under 5 and over. He's going at under 4 and over at one stage in the tournament as we got to the knockout stages. I think his economy rate was under 4, which is preposterous. I mean, many England bowlers don't have that economy rate in Test cricket. And so, in all seriousness, I do think that this has been a year when we've always known that Jasprit Bumrah was a very, very fine bowler. But this year, I think he has gone into the pantheon of the greats. And of all the bowlers I think I've ever seen, the difference between him and his peers this year is bigger than any difference I've seen between a bowler and their peers in any other year. He just has been remarkable.
Results numbers to back that up, I suppose, are pretty clear and conclusive.
Yes, in 2024 so far, and he has one test to go. 62 wickets at 14.5 in 12 tests with 4 5-wicket hauls and a lot of highly influential match-shaping spells. Mentioned that the one against England early in the year. If you want a specific spell, as in one single spell rather than innings, is 3 for 9 in 6 overs in the first test in Perth was absolutely magical. And Barney Ronay wrote a classically Ronayan lyrical article about it in the Guardian. Marco Jansen had an extraordinary spell, 7 for 13 against Sri Lanka. That was a very sort of bowling friendly pitch. In terms of I think probably Shamar Joseph for me wins the spell of the year for that sort of scintillating Brisbane masterpiece, particularly as it ended with the celebration of the year. Possibly the longest single celebration in terms of distance covered, particularly if you multiply it by all 11 West Indians on the pitch. It was truly spectacular, one of the great moments in modern cricket. A little mention for that Will O'Rourke spell in the final test. We've seen a lot of really exciting new bowlers come onto the test scene this year, and we'll talk about England's shortly. But O'Rourke bowled that fiery spell. He then got Brooke out, and that spell was on the scorecard 1 for 25 in 8 overs. But it was absolutely thrilling, really fast, regularly over 90 miles an hour, up against, it really discomforted both Brooke and Joe Root, the top 2 players in the world. We had him up against Bethel, the brilliant young England player who dealt with it really impressively. But in terms of just a little passage of cricket, for me, that was one of the highlights of the year.
I'm going for something a little quieter, but equally brilliant in its own way. Sophie Ecclestone bowling in the Test match. And bearing in mind that in the women's game, Test cricket is played so rarely. Just to put into context, that Test match between England and South Africa recently was the 150th in the history of women's Test match cricket. Joe Root himself, on his own, has played 152. So they play it very rarely, but Sophie Ecclestone, number 1 bowler in the world in T20 and ODI cricket, bowled 25 overs in South Africa's first innings. So that is, in the entirety of a one-day international from one end, and only got conceded runs at 1.6 and over. It allowed others to take wickets. I mean, it's ludicrous control. It is ludicrous longevity and fitness, and it was a heck of an effort. So I'm going to chuck that in there without necessarily the wickets and the drama. It was a model of adapting your game to the conditions.
The TMS Podcast from BBC Radio 5 Live.
What about team performances? The worst loss of 2024, the worst defeat of the year, Andy Zaltzman.
Well, looking at England, first of all, I mentioned they've had a lot of really good wins. In India, though they lost the series 4-1, they were competitive for certainly 3.5 tests before falling away at the end. But their record in final tests this year, 5 final tests, they beat the West Indies by 10 wickets. Other than that, they've had 4 absolutely clattering defeats. They lost by an innings and 64 in the final test in India. 8 wickets against Sri Lanka at the Oval in one of the most careless England performances of all time. They got well beaten by Pakistan by 9 wickets in the decider in Rawalpindi at the end of the test, and then at the end of that series when it was 1-1, and then 2-0 up, lost by 423 runs against New Zealand. All really terrible defeats. But I'm going to choose for England the Rawalpindi defeat because it was the deciding test, one of those games where the series was still live, and I think England had on the second test. It had been a very different pitch to that flat one in the first test. They'd not dealt with it pretty well, and what really disappointed me was that the sort of lack of adaptation to the conditions and the different challenges over the course of that series. Other than I'm going to go for, in terms of global defeats, India in the first test against New Zealand, all out for 46, conceded 402, then got themselves into a position to challenge New Zealand. They got to 408 for 3 in their second innings, and then collapsed again against O'Rourke and Henry, who both had fantastic matches in that game, and ended up losing by 8 wickets, and then going on to lose the next 2 tests as well. But it was though India played so much bad cricket in that game with the bat, in having been almost unbeatable at home over the previous 10 years. So for me, worst defeat of the year, particularly that first innings, 5 ducks from number 3 to 8. That for me is the worst single defeat of the Test year.
That was very unusual test, wasn't it? Because India elected to bat on a green top. And those aren't the words you normally expect to hear when a side is in India. What's going on there? But for me, I want to take another one in the subcontinent. And it's both games really, but I'm going to focus on the first one, played between Bangladesh and Pakistan. Local derby. It's played, I think, at Rawalpindi. And Pakistan scored 440 odd and then declare. And there's a lot of moaning, there's a lot of griping at the close of play on the second day. There's been a bit of rain around. The pitches, it's impossible for us to take wickets. We've got all these seamers. It's just the game is going to filter out into a draw. And then Bangladesh came out to bat, and they batted very, very slowly. They did the opposite of Bazball. They compiled over 500. And at the end of each day, you heard the Pakistanis say, this is the death of Test cricket. Bangladesh, this is outrageous. They're just playing for a draw. They've got absolutely no intent to win the game. Again, be very careful what you say, because Mother Cricket has a habit of biting back. Bangladesh got themselves their lead of 120, 130, albeit slowly and dismally. And then they bundled Pakistan out for next to nothing to win the game comfortably. Was it 10 wickets, I think, in the end, with a fair bit of time to spare. So in terms of worst defeats, I think to spend 4 days mithering about the lack of ambition of your opposition, only to be burgled by 10 wickets at home before the game is over, that's not a great look.
Burgled by 10 wickets. Marvellous. Yeah. That's what we like to see. What about this then? I'm going to chuck in South Africa's men in the World Cup final of the T20s. It's harsh possibly because Jasprit Bumrah was brilliant at the end and Arshdeep Singh bowled a brilliant final over, but they needed 30 from 30 balls. You got Heinrich Klaasen still there batting superbly well, having just scored a record or a rocket fast 50. And then suddenly it's all gone wrong and they end up losing by 10 runs and you just think, is it ever going to happen for them? And I don't know. It just felt for me that was a massive opportunity and they blew it. And so I'm going to chuck that in. Sorry, South Africa. I know.
Don't apologise. It's one of those things where I think we don't want to lose the joke, do we? If they ever were to win, you might also say they're women as well.
Well,
of course,
indeed.
Lost a World T20 final. This
Second year running.
And they were strong favourites to win it against New Zealand, whom we'll come to, I've no doubt, before the pod is out. But yeah, poor old South Africa.
Well, let's get a little more positive. What has been the best selection of 2024? If 2024 was a bag of Quality Street, who has got the toffee penny and who has got the big purple one?
Well, it's a very good question because there have been some really, really good ones this year. I'm going to allow Zoltz to talk about the England selections, I think, because in there's an incredible story. Incredible story we mentioned already of Tom Hartley, of Shoaib Bashir, of Gus Atkinson. A man who's ended up with a century, a tenfer and a hat-trick inside 11 Test matches. Absolutely ludicrous. Bryden Cars, what an extraordinary winter he's had. But because I think, in a way, England's selections probably need to be dealt with in the round, I want to mention Georgia Plimmer. And you may say, what? Why? Well, I'll tell you for why. Because Henry and I spent many a happy day in the commentary box alongside Frankie Mackay this year, who became increasingly despondent, increasingly despairing as New Zealand were thrashed pitilessly by England time and time again. And sort of almost iconically in the midst of all this was young Georgia Plimmer, who refused to learn from any of her mistakes, would get out for single-figure scores, looked utterly, desperately out of her depth. And then we'd job forward to us watching Georgia Plimmer again. And we saw Katie Martin in the box before the first game. They're playing against India. And I said, she said, "We're going to win this." I said, "You haven't got a prayer." New Zealand, they're absolutely dismal. Well, what do? They only went ahead and pulled off one of the shocks of the World Cup on their way to a truly extraordinary success, winning that T20 World Cup and at the top of the order, and solid as a rock, but full of imagination and marvellous stroke play, was none other than Georgia Plimmer. It was like somebody else had been inhabiting her body for the first 3/4 of the year, and then suddenly this whole new Georgia Plimmer. So I want to take my hats off to New Zealand selectors, because there is no way I would have picked that woman to play another game of cricket, any form of cricket, ever again after watching her in England. And yet somehow she's turned it all around and become a World Cup winner.
Yeah, that is a lovely shout. Zoltz, go on then. Give us the England numbers.
Well, yeah. So selection of the year is basically England's bowling selections. So this is my stat of the year as well, Henry. England's debutants, players who made their Test debut this year, between them have taken 156 wickets. So hang on, I just need to get up the stat. Hang on. Yeah, okay, got it. Between them, England debutants, players who've made their Test debut for England this year, have taken 156 out of the 294 Test wickets that England's men have taken in this calendar year. So leading the way, Gus Atkinson with 52 wickets in his 11 Test, average 22. Shoaib Bashir 49 at 40, brilliant start, tailed off a little bit, had a bit of a difficult winter. Bryden Carse, you mentioned, 27 wickets at 19 in his 5 Tests this winter. To put this in context, previously in a calendar year, the most wickets taken by players in the year of their debut for a team was 85. Now, England have played a lot of Tests this year, but they've almost doubled the previous record, and it's almost unprecedented for a team, other than in its first year or two of Test cricket, to have more than 50 wickets taken by players who, at the start of the calendar year, had never played Test cricket. And some of these selections have been really extraordinary. So Atkinson had a decent record for Surrey, but even so, I don't think you'd have expected him to come in and take 12 wickets on debut. He's had 3 fifers for England and a hat-trick for Surrey, taken 59 wickets in 19 first-class matches at 27, with only 1 fifer. Also scored his maiden first-class 100. Bashir came in with 10 wickets in 6 first-class matches, and then took 24 in his first 5 Tests, one of which he didn't bowl in, including 3 5-wicket hauls. Bryden Carse, perhaps the most extraordinary, came in off the back of a county season in which he took 4 for 424 in 4 matches, 27 wickets at 19 in his 5 Tests, including a 10-fer. He took 2 or more wickets in his first 9 innings. Atkinson did so in his first 10 innings. That puts them 3rd and 4th on the all-time England list of most consecutive twofers at the start of a career. Tom Hartley, you mentioned, 40 wickets in 20 first-class matches before coming in and taking 7 for 62 in the second innings of his Test debut. Truly extraordinary selections by England, and there'd been a lot of concern, discussion about how England would move into a new era after Anderson and Broad. And obviously it's early days yet, but the selectors have pulled some extraordinary statistical rabbits out of the hat based on almost the opposite of evidence from first-class cricket. And it's, I think, further testimony to some of the great successes that Stokes and McCullum have had, not in picking those players, but in giving them the confidence and environment to thrive instantly at the highest level.
And what for me was sorry, go on, Dad.
It's emblematic of is their urge to try and find people who they think suit Test cricket. Stephen Finn wrote a great piece on the BBC website. You can find it about the difference between taking wickets in test conditions and county conditions. But it hasn't always worked. Josh Hull was an unusual pick with similar figures to Bryden Cast, but again selected because of his stature, because of his height, really, and his angle. And just a last mention on that, if we were going to come down to the best selection, I think it would have to be Gus Atkinson, because when we were discussing best innings, I didn't mention this because I knew we were going to mention Atkinson later, but his 100 at Lords was so good that everyone said they couldn't tell the difference between him and Root and Brooke. It was chanceless. I think it had a very low false shot percentage and was truly one of the most remarkable innings possibly played in Test history, apart from one that I'm going to come to very shortly. There's a teaser for you.
Well, that is exciting news. 103 balls, the sixth fastest for England at Lords, Gus Atkinson's son. As you say, it was chanceless. It was quite remarkable.
Also, we talk about the situation of innings. It was the first innings of the second test. He came in at 216 for 6. So England weren't in a great position. He did have Root at the other end, but it was an innings that helped set up a fine victory for England.
What about the biggest surprise that we've seen in 2024? It feels like it's been a year of surprises. We've seen loads of cricket, loads of upsets. It's been a veritable selection box, Daniel.
It has. I'm going to let Zoltz run us through in a minute the true absurdity of this year's Test cricket. The number of amazing results abroad, apart from everything else. To run through a couple of them very quickly. New Zealand, we mentioned, winning 3-0 in India. Insane. Bangladesh winning 2-0 in Pakistan. Frankly, England winning 2-1 in New Zealand and being 2-0 up really quite convincingly. But because I think that that deserves a little bit of a statistical dive, I'm going to tee up what I think is the greatest surprise in the history of Test cricket, which is that my friend Nahid Rana, who has to be a contender for the very worst batter who has ever set foot in a Test match, he's a man, don't forget, who holds the record for the most consecutive scoreless innings, 19 times. Only 12 times was he out, in fairness. 7 naught not outs, but 19 consecutive noughts, thrashing the previous record set by former England women's coach Mark Robinson of 12. I mean, that's big numbers. At the time that he walked out to bat for Bangladesh against India, the best bowler in the world was having his best season, Jasprit Bumrah. In walks Nahid Rana. At the time, I think he'd scored 13 first-class runs at an average of below a half. He then proceeds to take 11 runs. 11 doesn't sound like a lot, but in the context of Nahid Rana's entire life and in the context of Test cricket history, to have scored nearly 50% of your total first-class runs in one innings against the best bowler in the world. I can see the shots now. There was a heave out to mid-wicket. There was a thick edge down to deep third. Beautifully played. He must presumably have swung the bat before and missed, but there was something about Bumrah's bowling he took a liking to that day. Yeah, it destroyed a really good average. I think his average is now up above 1. It's about 1.2.
It's 2.6 actually now.
2.6. I'm very disappointed.
That's tests, Henry. I mean, it's still 1.3 in first class.
Okay, 1.3 in first class. Yeah, please. The world's not gone that mad. But it was for me. I just remember being so thrilled watching it and so in disbelief. And I also think that these guys don't quite get the props they deserve, because whilst I take the mickey out of his terrible batting, he also bowled superbly in the series against Bangladesh, against Pakistan, regularly reaching 92, 93 miles an hour. He's a proper old school cricketer. He makes Chris Martin look like Don Bradman.
He's also just scored 4 not out playing against West Indies in an ODI, so he's finding his groove.
Just a little bit of further statistical context on it. His last 17 first-class matches, he scored 11 for naught off 7 balls from Jasprit Bumrah and 2 for 16 off 110 balls off the other 8 billion people in the world who are not the best bowler on the planet. So truly extraordinary. As you say, I mean, that Bangladesh win in Pakistan, we had him and Hassan Mahmood, another debutant this year, really nice swing bowler, bowled superbly. Nahid had his first fifer against West Indies in Test cricket in November. Only Mark Wood has bowled consistently faster than him this year. Really exciting development for Bangladesh. But my biggest surprise, I'm going to go to that India-New Zealand series, and Mitchell Santner, who before he came in the second Test had played 28 Tests in a pretty long career. Much more successful in white ball cricket. In Tests, he'd taken 54 wickets, averaged 42. Had never taken a forfer in 47 innings. He'd just come off the back of a poor series in Sri Lanka, 1 wicket for 197 in the 2 Tests. And then in the second Test in India, he took 7 for 53 and 6 for 104 to bowl New Zealand to a series win, comfortably out-bowling India's spinners in their home turf. Then followed it up. Didn't play again until the final Test against England. Took 3 for 7 and 4 for 85. So 20 for 249 in his last 2 Tests. His previous 11 Tests, he'd taken 20 for 1,017 over 5 years. So in terms of unexpected bolts from the blue, Mitchell Santner's performance in that second Test in India, followed up with in the third Test against England, is one of the all-time greats in Test history. He only had 1 fifer in his entire first-class career in 63 matches and averaged well over 40 in domestic first-class cricket as well. But yeah, played superbly, also contributed useful runs down the order. So that, for me, Henry, is my big surprise of the year.
It's actually been one of the features of this year has been the surprises. I mean, we mentioned already New Zealand women winning the T20 World Cup, the 3-0 win by New Zealand, the 2-0 win. And it's something, Zoltz, that it seems peculiar to 2024, is that sides going away are winning games of cricket. We mentioned before, the West Indies winning in Brisbane, winning at the Gabatoir, first time in Yonks. India winning at Perth. What an extraordinary thing that was.
Yeah, well, overall, Dan, the away team has won 21 out of 49 Tests and lost 26. That's the most away wins in a Test year. Been quite a lot of matches this year. And also, modern cricket has almost no draws, just 2 draws in those 49 Tests, both rain affected. By comparison, in 2022 and 2023, away teams collectively won 21 and lost 42. So a sort of 0.5 win-loss ratio. That was up to 0.8 this year, which is the second highest in the last 13 years of Test cricket. So we've seen a lot more away wins. And in terms of who can beat whom, between sort of September and the end of October, we had England lost to Pakistan, who lost to Bangladesh, who lost to India, who lost to New Zealand, who lost to Sri Lanka, who lost to England. So that was in the end of the English summer. So, yeah, extraordinarily competitive and unpredictable. And I think part of the influence on that has been the World Test Championship, which, no, it hasn't been a big thing for England, but I think it is really starting to impact on Test cricket broadly in terms of the commitment to it from the teams and the players and the general competitiveness of Test cricket.
What about the return of Jofra Archer as a viable potential prospect to play Test match cricket again? I never saw that happening in a million years, but he's been playing a full and active role in England's T20 and ODI squads since May, and there are legitimate conversations about him being part of the Ashes in 12 months' time, which is a massive surprise. Daniel, for me, I never saw that coming.
No, but you're not supposed to say it. Because that's the deal that we all have to make about Jofra Archer, which is to assume that we'll never see him play Test cricket again. Otherwise, we'll jinx it, because it would be quite simply delicious. And trying to stay neutral in these matters, as we do on Test Match Special, I just think it would be great for the game of cricket if England could pitch up in Australia with Archer, Cars, Atkinson and Wood. It could be finally payback for 74-75 and Lillian Thompson. Who knows? I mean, let's not get too excited, though. Can we scrub this? Can we edit this out? Otherwise, we've jinxed Jofra Archer forever.
Sorry, we will forget I ever said anything. Okay, our final award of the year of 2024 is the best win. Quite simply, the best victory achieved by a side across the 12 months of 2024. There are so many options. There are so many great cases to be made. But Andy Zaltzman, who was top of your list?
Well, I just mentioned sort of how many wins we've seen of teams beating other teams, and And, in the course of that change, then we saw, England having lost to Pakistan, going to win in New Zealand, who'd won 3-0 in India. The team with the best win-loss ratio in Test cricket this year is Ireland, who won both of their 2 Test matches. Australia next with 5 wins, 2 defeats so far with one match to go. So, but all the teams that have played a lot of Test cricket have had wins and losses. So my best win. I mean, I do think England's win in New Zealand is one of their best series victories for a long time. In that context of New Zealand, with a really good regenerating side, having come off that spectacular win in India, and they kept Rachin Ravindra really quiet, one of the most exciting players in Test cricket, up against Henry and O'Rourke, really superb pair of fast bowlers. But Bangladesh in Pakistan winning 2-0. But I think I will have to go with New Zealand in India, just because of how few matches India had lost since they last lost a home series to Alistair Cook's team in late 2012. No one had expected it. It helped keep the World Test Championship really interesting. People thought India would sort of run away with one of the two spots for the final. But to win 3-0 in India, whether it's the Indian team at the end of a cycle, we've seen Ashwin retire since then. Kohli and Sharma both really struggling long term for productivity with the bat. But even so, it was one of the most spectacular away wins in Test history.
I can't really see beyond that. It's, to me, the most remarkable victory since Sri Lanka beat South Africa many years ago with one of the great innings that was up there with Ben Stokes. Kushal Perera, in tandem with the number 11, got Sri Lanka over the line. It was up there with Stokes' innings, if not better, given the context and the bowlers and the fact that it's Sri Lanka away in South Africa. So, yeah, I think the 3-0 win by New Zealand bears comparison with that. In terms of individual wins, well, we've mentioned Hyderabad, which was stunning because of the 190-run deficit. But this may seem a bit perverse, but actually, for me, India's win in Perth was a heck of a surprise because they arrived against a very settled Australia side. How they've managed to keep doing this, although I don't know for how much longer they will, but get Hazlewood, Cummins, Stark and Lyon to bowl together yet again. And this was an Australian side that, apart from uncertainty at the very top of the order, looked settled. Labuschagne, Smith, Travis Head, but it did mask some problems, some form problems that we weren't really aware of. To go to Perth with a depleted fast bowling lineup, not having Mohammed Shami, again having to play players who are inexperienced in Australian conditions, and then get bowled out very cheaply in the first innings, to hear the Australian commentators so certain of victory after 4 hours, and then to see them try to process the reality of Jasprit Bumrah and how it wasn't going to be that easy after all. They bundled out Australia for 100 and a bit. They then dominated the game. Yashasvi Jaiswal, one of the players of 2024, coming to the fore. It was a real shock for Australia and for Australians. Now, Australia, at the time of recording, have bounced back. The series is level. It's beautifully poised. But I think for surprise, it should be up there.
Yeah, sensational game and spectacular series, as we expected as well. I'm going to chuck in something that was, for me, the odds that you would have got at the start of the Women's T20 World Cup on a side that had come into the competition in the format, having lost 10 games in a row, being absolutely hammered by England across the English summer. A team that, to all intents and purposes, stood no chance, and yet New Zealand won the T20 World Cup. It was implausible, it was impossible, and they did it, and it was remarkable. And I don't think, in terms of World Cups, men's or women's, in the history of the competition, maybe you go back to 1996 and Sri Lanka and that remarkable run there, but they had so many talented players and there was nothing like that run of form. But you look at that New Zealand performance, it was unbelievable. It
was a bit like Greece winning the Euros, wasn't it? Only done with a lot more flamboyance and flair. And it came accompanied with, and we haven't got an award for this, but the best noise of the year. And the best noise of the year was undoubtedly made by Eden Carson.
You're a semi-finalist. How does that feel?
It should basically accompany every text message I ever received forever.
How does that feel?
It was an absolute delight. And it was actually very symbolic of the way New Zealand played their cricket. We were sharing the hotel with all the teams, Henry, and they just seemed like the happiest camp, didn't they? And I was just delighted for them.
Yeah, amazing game. That noise, as you say, from Eden Castle, is sort of.
You're a semi-finalist. How does that feel?
Pretty good.
The full Toscas, there we go. It's been a marvellous year, hasn't it? We've had an absolute hoot. It's been great fun. Daniel, thank you. Zoltz, you've enjoyed the year?
Yes, there's been a lot of cricket in it, Henry. So that makes it a good year. 17 test matches for England. I think there'll be over 50 test matches all around the world. But test cricket continues to fight against its administrators. The players still clearly love it. And I think I'm more hopeful for the future at the end of this year than 12 months ago.
I just think it's been a wonderfully fun year for us. It was a strange old summer, wasn't it? Because you get this in even-numbered years, England playing against the West Indies and Sri Lanka. And again, we had the same arguments. Oh no, Test cricket, it's too one-sided. Everyone would say that in summer. It hasn't turned out that way at all. And next year promises to be just as much fun. England won't play as many Test matches, but the ones they'll play will have enormous significance. Their women will play a Test match early on in January. You'll be out there for the Women's Ashes. That promises to be thrilling. England play a 5-match series at home against India, and then they go to Australia for the Ashes, and we always get very excited about it. Jofra Archer, as you say, could he be there this time next year? What will our Toscas look like then? I'm very hopeful for them.